The sensor platform H-Vora hung in cold orbit around a dead moon, 10 light-years out from the inner reach of the Vrelhan Dominion. For 9 cycles, the watch officer on duty, Drev Korlin, had logged nothing more interesting than ice debris and a passing trader caravan. The 10th cycle changed everything. His display flickered. A signal, faint at first, then steady, crossed the deep space lattice from beyond the surveyed corridor. Korlin leaned forward, mandibles tightening. He ran the spectral profile through 5 identification matrices. Each came back empty. The hull material did not match Vrelhan steel, nor Kashan alloy, nor any of the dozen lesser species charted in the Imperial Registry. Its drive plume burned in a frequency band the catalog did not list. Its mass read as small, a single vessel, no escort, no formation. And yet the residual energy bloom around its envelope pushed his instruments toward saturation. He keyed the priority channel. H-Vora to inner command, unidentified contact, repeat, unidentified contact. The reply took 14 heartbeats. Specify classification. Cannot classify. Hull profile is not in any registry. Pirate rig. Negative. The geometry is wrong for any pirate clan I have ever logged. A pause, then a different voice, older, harder. Korlin Vector. He pulled the trajectory plot and his throat went dry. The line was clean. There was no orbital wandering, no course correction, no patrol arc. The vessel cut through space along a single straight bearing. Sir, the trajectory points straight at us. At the platform. At Drasivar Prime. The line went quiet for the length of 3 breaths. Then the order came. Lock the signal, mirror the data, escalate to the spire. Korlin obeyed and watched the unknown vessel slide deeper into the sensor field, its movement unhurried, almost calm. He had served the Vrelhan crown for 28 cycles. He had seen smugglers and rebels and the burning of 2 colony worlds. Never had he seen something his instruments could not name. He reached for his prayer beads and found his claws shaking. In the spire of the High Throne, 4 light-years from the platform, High Marshal Koret stood before the war table. The hologram flickered between him and the Emperor's silent envoys. Around them, advisors murmured calculations and casualty curves. Koret listened with one ear and watched the line. That line. It troubled him in ways the data alone could not explain. Every threat the Dominion had ever faced moved in chains and clusters, fleets, wings, raiding parties. A single vessel did not approach an Imperial seat. A single vessel did not even appear on the same scale as a true threat. And yet his fingers would not let go of the table's edge. Marshal and aide whispered, "Your orders." He spoke without turning. "Intercept. Bring me a full reconnaissance wing, 8 cruisers, 12 gun frigates. I want eyes on the hull before it crosses the second border." The aide hesitated. "For 1 ship." Koret finally turned. His pupils had narrowed to slits. "For a ship our entire empire cannot name, send the wing." He repeated to himself that there was no force in the charted reach the Vrelhan Navy could not break in detail. He repeated it as the wing burned out of orbit and crossed the inner curve. He repeated it as the cruiser captains reported visual lock, then weapons range, then the strange refusal of the vessel to answer hails. And then the screens at the war table went dark. Every screen. At the same moment. Koret did not blink. He stepped closer to the empty hologram and spoke quietly to the silence where his fleet had been. "Bring it back." Nothing returned. The line on the chart, the one cutting toward Drasivar Prime, continued its steady advance. The hull the Empire could not identify had not changed its trajectory, and somewhere behind the closed door of the throne room, an old monarch was being woken from his sleep. For 3 hours, no transmission came back from the recon wing. No black box, no escape pod chatter, no debris signature consistent with combat. The cruisers and frigates had not been destroyed in any pattern Vrelhin doctrine recognized. They had been removed. High Marshal Koret paced the length of the war chamber. His honor sash hung crooked across his shoulder, forgotten. Around him, the spire's deepest minds argued over data that refused to make sense. They jumped, one analyst insisted. All 20 hulls, they executed a synchronized FTL withdrawal. From combat, snapped another. 20 hulls do not jump in formation under fire. The math forbids it. Then what is your explanation? Silence answered him. In a side room, beneath flickering data panels, a young intelligence cadet named Sadai Velm read the same anomaly report for the 4th time. She had been told to compile a list of every species ever flagged in the Dominion's expansion archives. Most of the file was routine, chartered worlds, registered minor powers, defeated holdouts. But buried near the bottom of the suppressed records, she found a brief entry her seniors had quietly hidden. The entry described an outpost, a colony built by a thin-limbed bipedal species on a watery world at the trailing edge of the 8th quadrant. The Vrelhin Expeditionary Fleet had encountered it during a routine sweep generations ago, found its inhabitants poorly armed, and reduced the surface to slag in 2 days. Surveys after the action had identified no further presence of the species. The entry concluded, subject group considered extinct. File closed. She read the species name 3 times before she carried the data slate to the chamber. Koret took the slate. His mandibles tightened as his eyes flicked across the file. Humans, he said. Yes, Marshal. This action took place 60 cycles ago, 3 generations. Yes, Marshal. And they were considered finished. By the officer who signed the report. He has since died. The file was never reviewed. Koret looked from her to the data table, where the line of the inbound vessel had advanced another full segment. A vessel of a species the Dominion had once erased with 2 days of bombardment. A vessel whose hull the Empire could not now identify. He set the slate down with care. Send a translation hail, he ordered. Every band the catalog holds. Demand identification. Demand surrender. Tell them we are willing to discuss terms. And if they do not answer, then call the home fleet, every ship, every gun crew. I want a wall of steel between that vessel and the throne by the time it crosses the 3rd border. Across 40 light minutes, the hails went out. Every band, every protocol, every dialect the Vrelhin registry could produce, including the dead languages of conquered worlds. The intruder did not reply. Its course did not bend. Its drive plume did not change frequency. The Empire scrambled. Within a single day cycle, 400 warships answered the priority recall. The home fleet drew into a defensive crescent around Drasivar Prime, the Imperial seat. Orbital platforms unsealed their long guns. The spire raised its inner shields. Civilian traffic was grounded across the inner reach. State media reported nothing. On the bridge of the flagship Crown of Vraskal, Fleet Lord Marin stood before a viewport that showed the curve of the homeworld in soft amber. He had served 3 emperors. He had crushed 2 rebellions. He had never been asked to defend the throne itself. He turned to his sensor officer, range to the contact. 3 light towers, Fleet Lord, holding course. Speed. Constant since first detection. It has not accelerated. It has not decelerated. It moves as if it cannot be stopped. Marin's claws closed on the rail. Every vessel moves on physics. We will find what stops it. In a quiet office in the spire, the Emperor Sothvar listened to the war report from his chamberlain. The old monarch sat unmoving on his low chair, watching a single candle gutter in its dish. When the report ended, he spoke for the only time that hour. 60 cycles ago, he said, I signed the order for that bombardment. I was a young prince then. I did not read the file. I trusted the recommendation of my generals. The chamberlain hesitated. Highness, bring me the original report. I wish to remember the name of the world we burned." Outside, the line on every chart in the Empire continued its steady advance. The lone vessel crossed the third border at the prescribed hour, at the prescribed speed, and along the prescribed line. Nothing about it had changed. Nothing about it would. Fleet Lord Marin watched it appear on his tactical board. A single hull, no escort, no jump signature, no electronic countermeasures, no broadcasts, no transponders, no banner. The Empire's full home fleet sat in a wall in front of it. 400 warships, 2,000 fighter craft, 6 orbital fortresses, and the planetary shield grid of Drasivar Prime. The intruder did not slow. "Hails," Marin asked. "Open, Fleet Lord, all channels." No response. 14 attempts. He drew in a long breath. "Forward elements, weapons hot, targeting solution on the contact. Begin warning volley." The first salvo lit the dark, 60 long-range plasma lances. Every one of them aimed to bracket the intruder without striking it. A standard Vrelhin warning pattern. Even pirate ships, even rebel ships, would break in response to such a wall of light. The unknown vessel passed through the lattice of warning fire, without altering course by so much as a degree. Marin felt the silence on his bridge thicken. He had spent his career commanding fleets that obeyed laws of motion and laws of fear. The thing in front of him obeyed neither. "Live volley," he said. "All forward batteries, center of mass." This time the fleet did not warn. Plasma lances and rail slugs and missile clusters lanced toward the contact in a cone of fire that should have torn a destroyer to ribbons. The contact, by every standard tonnage estimate, was a frigate or smaller. The volley reached its target. The volley did not return a kill confirm. Marin leaned forward. "Sensor, report." His sensor officer's voice cracked. "Fleet Lord, we have impact data. Surface contact on the hull, no penetration, no deflection, no spalling. The energy is absent." "Absent how?" "It does not register as absorbed. It does not register as reflected. The instruments record the impact, then record nothing, as if the strikes never happened." Marin stared at the readouts. They lied to him in a careful, professional voice. The volley had not bounced. It had not been shrugged off. It had been forgotten by the universe. He spoke quietly. "Order the picket line forward." A wing of 30 frigates broke from the wall and accelerated. Their orders were simple: harass at close range, force the contact to maneuver, force a vector change, force a tell. Vrelhin doctrine had reduced larger threats with this tactic in a dozen wars. The contact crossed the picket line at the same speed it had held for 3 days. Then, at the exact moment the lead frigate brought its torpedoes to bear, the lone vessel did something the entire Vrelhin fleet would later describe in 3 different ways and agree on none of them. To some observers, it shimmered. To others, it tilted. To others, it appeared to step sideways without moving. When the picket line completed its sensor sweep, 4 of the 30 frigates were no longer present. The other 26 reported full systems and clean hulls and pilots staring at one another in confusion, because the 4 missing ships had not exploded. They had been removed from the formation, the way a hand removes a piece from a board. The picket commander began to weep on an open channel. He was a decorated officer. He had buried his brother during the rebellion of the Eotian Reach. He had not wept in 50 cycles. "Fleet Lord," he whispered into the bridge, "what is this?" Marin did not answer. He turned to the chamberlain who waited at the rear of the deck, the Emperor's chosen ear. "Tell the spire," he said, "that we cannot defeat this with steel." The chamberlain swallowed. "And if a parley is refused?" Marin looked back at the tactical board. The line was still moving. Drasivar Prime was a single hour away. "Then tell the Emperor he should pray to whatever god he keeps." Behind him, the sensor officer cried out. Every panel on the bridge flickered, and on the main viewport, where the contact had been a single bright dot a moment before, Something else now hung in its place. A name. A name had been etched, in a Vrelhin glyph from the founding script of the Imperial line, onto the hull of the unknown ship. The fleet watched in silence as the recognition processors read it aloud. Hadley. The name on the hull was not a warning, it was a memorial. On the bridge of the unknown ship, behind a viewport that did not reflect the firelight of the Vrelhin fleet, a man stood in a dark uniform with his hands folded behind his back. He was lean, gray at the temples, with a scar that ran from his jaw to the base of his neck. His name was Captain Idris Vance. The ship he commanded had no public class and no official designation, but its crew called it the Hadley. He watched the Vrelhin flagship try to read the name etched into his hull. Recognition processor confirmed, sir, his executive officer reported. They have seen it. Good, Vance said. Then they remember. 60 cycles ago, 60 Vrelhin cycles, 53 Earth years, a small colony had stood on a coastal world the settlers had named Hadley's Reach. 12,000 people, 2 cities, a fishing fleet, a grade school where a 6-year-old boy with skinned knees had been chasing a kite across a sand flat the morning the sky changed color. The boy had survived because his mother shoved him into a service tunnel and slammed the lid before the second bombardment wave. He had stayed in that tunnel for 6 days. When the recovery teams found him, he was holding a piece of his mother's shawl in one fist and the broken handle of the kite in the other. He had refused to let go of either. Earth had not forgotten Hadley's Reach. Earth had not retaliated either, not at the time. The species that struck the colony had withdrawn quickly and erased their tracks. Earth's analysts had pieced together fragments of the attacker's identity over years, decades, generations. They had logged the species under a quiet designation and added it to a list. The list was not a list for diplomacy. Idris Vance had grown up in the orphan dormitories of Geneva and Lagos. He had enlisted at 16. He had spent his 20s in the asymmetric warfare division, his 30s in the strategic ship program, and his 40s commanding the slow, deliberate construction of the first Verdict-class vessel. The Hadley was the only Verdict-class hull ever built. Earth had chosen not to mass-produce it. Earth had built it for a single purpose, and Vance had volunteered to crew it before the bulkheads were welded shut. He turned from the viewport. Around him, the bridge was quiet. 12 officers, each chosen by name, each with a reason. The navigator had lost a sister at the colony of Westmark. The chief engineer's grandfather had died in the bombardment of Tycho Crossing. The communications officer was the daughter of a doctor who had been working at Hadley's Reach the day it ended. Vance looked at her now. Patch the Imperial channel, the one they keep trying to reach us on. Aye, Captain. A soft chime, a connection. A Vrelhin voice, careful and precise, came through the speakers. Unknown vessel. This is the spire of the High Throne. We invoke parley. We invite negotiations. We have authority from the Emperor Sothvar himself to discuss terms of withdrawal. Vance did not answer at once. He let the silence hang. He let the Vrelhin command staff hear their own breath through the open channel. Then he spoke, and his voice was even and almost gentle, and entirely without warmth. You sent a fleet to my homeworld 60 cycles ago. You burned 12,000 of my people in 2 days. You closed the file. You assumed the species extinct. Then you slept very well for 60 cycles. The channel remained open. The spire did not answer. I am not here to discuss withdrawal, Vance continued. I am here to deliver a message. The message is for the Emperor in person. Your fleet will stand down. Your shields will lower. You will not fire another shot at this hull. If you do, I will remove your home fleet from the board as efficiently as I removed your picket. Do you understand me? There was a long pause. Then the Vrelhin voice, careful, precise, and shaking, answered. Captain, the Emperor will see you. Vance nodded once. Good, tell him I am bringing the kite. The Vrelhin home fleet stood down across 2 hours. 400 warships, each one larger than the Hadley, banked their forward batteries and dropped their shields one squadron at a time. Fleet Lord Marin issued the orders himself, and his voice cracked twice in the process, and no officer commented on it. Not every commander obeyed at once. In the 3rd Squadron of the Outer Ring, Sub-Marshal Drevek Kor, a young, ambitious officer whose uncle had led the bombardment of Hadley's Reach, watched the Hadley begin its descent and felt his honor twist in his chest. His uncle had been a hero of the Dominion. Drevek had been raised on the story of the clean strike at the edge of the 8th Quadrant. He did not believe a single ship could humble 400. He did not believe the Empire should bow to a corpse coming back to its grave. He gave the order, and 3 of his frigates broke from formation with weapons hot. On the Hadley's bridge, the navigator's console pinged. Vance read the contact and did not raise his voice. Communications, open channel to the breakaway. Channel open, Captain. Sub-Marshal, you have 8 seconds to return to formation. Drevek Kor laughed on the open channel. Or what human? Will you remove 3 more ships? You cannot remove every ship. You are one hull. We are an empire. 8 seconds. The seconds ran out. The frigates fired. The Hadley did not move. The volley did not reach the hull. Each of the 3 frigates in the same fraction of a moment ceased to be on the board. There was no flash. There was no debris. There was a brief pulse of nonsense on the sensor channels, and then 3 names dropped out of the Imperial Registry as if the bookkeeper had erased them. Drevek Kor's flagship remained. The Hadley's voice came again, level and quiet. Sub-Marshal, look at your fleet. Drevek looked at his fleet. The 400 warships around him had not moved. None of them had defended his frigates. None of them had even challenged the Hadley's response. The Empire had decided in those few seconds what the price of further insolence would be, and the Empire had no intention of paying it. Stand down, Marin's voice cut in across the Imperial Channel. Stand down or I will pull your commission with my own claws. Drevek Kor stood down. He sat unmoving on his bridge after the fact, looked at his own reflection in the viewport, and could not recognize the face he saw there. The Hadley descended through the upper atmosphere of Drasivar Prime. No fighters rose to intercept. The orbital shield grid had been opened wide. Below the cloud line, the city of the Spire spread in concentric rings around the Throne Hill, and 10 million Vrelhin citizens watched a single small shape draw a glowing line across their sky. On the bridge, Vance keyed his personal channel to the chief engineer. Klein, status of the secondary. A pause, then a low, steady voice. Cradled and warm, Captain, tied to your authorization. Hold it warm, hold it quiet, until I give the word. Aye, Captain. The communications officer glanced sideways. She knew, as everyone on the Hadley knew, that the ship carried more than the weapon that had erased the picket. The Verdict-class hull had been built around a payload Earth had spent decades refining in deep silence. It was not for use today. It was for use only if today failed. The Hadley settled, with a hiss of displaced air, on the wide landing terrace of the Imperial Palace. The blast doors of the Throne Hill stood open. A line of palace guards waited at full ceremonial dress, their weapons holstered, their faces unreadable. At the top of the long stair, a single figure waited, robes of deep imperial color, a thin circlet across the brow. The Emperor Sathvar himself, alone, without throne or court or armed retinue. Vance stepped down from the ramp of the Hadley, with 2 officers behind him. He carried nothing in his hands but a small folded square of fabric that had once been part of a child's kite. He crossed the terrace and began the climb. The Emperor watched him come. The stair to the Throne Hill numbered 500 steps. Each step was carved from black mountain stone, polished by generations of monarchs and supplicants, and the slow tread of palace ceremony. Idris Vance climbed them at the pace of a man who had earned every meter of his approach over 53 years. The Emperor Sathvar waited at the top, hands folded in front of his robes, eyes the color of an old wound. When Vance reached the final step, he stopped, and the two men regarded each other across a span of perhaps 4 paces. Neither spoke at once. The wind carried the distant sound of the palace bells. Below, the city was hushed. "You are Captain Vance," the Emperor said. "I am." "You came from Hadley's Reach." "I did." The Emperor inclined his head, a small motion, almost a bow. "I signed the order for the bombardment of your colony. I was a young prince. I did not read the survey. My generals told me your kind were prey, and I believed them because I was lazy and because I was vain. I have spent every cycle since trying to forget the name of that world. I cannot forget it any longer." Vance studied him for a long beat. He had rehearsed many speeches on the long crossing from Earth. He had prepared rage and contempt and grief and a careful, surgical coldness. None of them seemed correct in the wind on the throne hill, in front of an old man who had not pretended otherwise. He chose the truth instead. "My mother's name was Adiz Vance," he said. "She worked the harbor office. The morning your fleet arrived, she pushed me into a maintenance shaft and dropped the lid on my fingers. She broke 2 of my knuckles to make me let go. She did it because she knew the second wave was coming, and she knew the shaft was rated for the load. She bought me 60 hours of air with a single push. She did not survive long enough to know I lived." The Emperor closed his eyes. "I was 6 years old," Vance continued. "When I crawled out of that shaft, the colony was gone, not damaged, gone, 12,000 people, the fishing fleet at anchor, the grade school. Every map I had ever known was burned off the world. The recovery teams found me holding 2 things, a piece of my mother's shawl, a broken kite." He opened the folded fabric in his hand and showed it to the Emperor. The cloth was old, faded, kept in vacuum for decades. The Emperor looked at it as a man might look at evidence offered against him in a court he could not appeal. "I did not come to your throne to kill you, Sathvar," Vance said. "If killing was the message, my crew and I would be on a different vector. I came to deliver 3 pieces of information. Hear me carefully." The Emperor opened his eyes. "Speak." "First, my ship is one of one. Earth chose not to build a second hull of this class. Earth did not need to. The weapon you saw used on your picket is not the weapon I carry in reserve. The weapon I carry in reserve is intended for the suppression of an entire star system. If you understand what I am saying, you understand I could have arrived in orbit and ended your line without setting foot on this stair." "I understand." "Second, behind me at a distance of 6 light-years enclosing is the Earth-standing fleet, 2,000 hulls. None of them carry the weapon my hull carries. They do not need to. They are coming, regardless of how this conversation ends. Their purpose is not punishment. Their purpose is observation. They will sit at the edge of your inner reach and they will watch every Vrelhin vessel that moves for as long as Earth requires. The bombardment of further worlds will not occur." The Emperor did not draw breath for a long moment. "And the third?" Vance held up the small, folded fabric of the kite. "The third," he said quietly, "is that my mother's shawl traveled with me on this voyage. It is on the bridge of my ship. I intend to take it home. Whether I take it home through a peace treaty or through the ruins of your throne is, at this moment, your choice and only your choice." The Emperor looked at the broken kite in the captain's hand. He looked at the city below. He looked last at his own folded hands. Then he turned, without a word, and walked back into the throne hall, and held the door open for the captain to follow. The throne hall of the Vrelhin Dominion had hosted 9 emperors, 4 civil wars, and the surrender ceremonies of 11 defeated worlds. None of those rituals had unfolded in silence. On the day, the captain of the Hadley sat across from Sathvar at a low writing table near the eastern wall. No minister spoke, no bell rang, and no court historian was permitted in the chamber. The terms were brief. Earth had written them years before the Hadley ever burned its first ounce of fuel. The Vrelhan Dominion would dissolve its Expeditionary Command, the branch of the Imperial Navy responsible for the bombardment of unaligned outposts would be disbanded, its records released, its officers, both retired and serving, open to a tribunal staffed by survivors of the worlds they had broken. The Crown would surrender its right to claim Virgin Systems unilaterally. An Earth observation fleet would sit at the edge of the inner reach for one full Vrelhan generation. Every Imperial fleet movement would be reported to the observers in advance. The list of worlds the Dominion had erased from its maps would be restored, named, and entered into the public archive of the Empire. The name Hadley's Reach would lead that list. Sothvar read the document 3 times. He did not negotiate any clause. He affixed his personal mark to the bottom of each page, and when the last page was sealed, he set the writing stylus down with the care of a man laying flowers on a grave. "Captain," he said, "may I ask one question?" "You may." "Will Earth forgive us?" Vance considered the question for a long moment. He looked at the old monarch across the table, at the lined face, at the trembling hands resting on the signed pages. He thought of his mother. He thought of the harbor office. He thought of the kite. "I do not know," he said. "Forgiveness is not a clause in a treaty. Forgiveness is a private act between individuals. My mother is not here to forgive you. I am not certain I am ready to. But Earth is not asking for forgiveness today, Sothvar. Earth is asking for an end to your right to do this to anyone else. That much you have signed." The Emperor lowered his head. "Then I accept." When the chamber doors opened, the Chamberlain who had carried the Emperor's first messages to the spire was waiting, holding a small lacquered box. Sothvar took it from him, opened it, and offered the contents to Vance. Inside lay a folded square of blue cloth, old, salt-stained, carefully preserved. The Chamberlain head bowed. Found his voice. "After the bombardment of your colony," he said softly, "a Vrelhan officer named Krever went down to the surface. He was meant to verify the kill. He could not bring himself to follow his orders. He gathered what fragments he could find and brought them home. He hid them. He never spoke of them. He died last cycle. We found this in his quarters when we cleared his estate." Vance took the cloth in both hands. He recognized the weave. He recognized the pattern. It was the corner of a shawl that matched the piece on the bridge of the Hadley. He did not weep. He stood unmoving, and he held the cloth, and his executive officer at his shoulder stepped half a pace away to give him space, and the Emperor across the table looked down at his own folded hands and did not interrupt. "Tell me," Vance said quietly, "where Krever is buried." "In the city of Vraskin Low, near the southern coast. I would like to lay flowers on his grave before I leave." "It will be arranged." The Hadley lifted from the Imperial Terrace at the close of the second day. The Earth-standing fleet arrived at the edge of the inner reach at the close of the third. The Vrelhan home fleet remained at anchor, banked and quiet, as the small dark hull of the Verdict-class vessel turned its bow toward home. On the bridge, Vance stood with one piece of cloth in his right hand and another in his left. The Hadley accelerated away from the system the Empire had used to call itself untouchable. The line on the chart, this time, pointed home. Somewhere on Earth, in a quiet field outside Lagos, a stone was being readied. 12,000 names had been carved into it over 53 years, one name at a time, by a council of orphans who had refused to let any of them be forgotten. There was room at the bottom of the stone for the name of a Vrelhan officer named Krever. It would be added in the spring.